2003, the son of a constituent of mine, Mr Ian Stanton, went missing. More than 10 years later, his whereabouts is still unknown. I was recently contacted by Mr Stanton's father, Norman, who's concerned with the lack of a national database for missing persons in Australia. Currently, it's the role of police services in each state and territory to investigate reported cases in their jurisdiction. They each coordinate their own missing person system with no link between them. So once a missing person crosses state lines, they drop off the radar and the database on which they were first registered, and it becomes increasingly difficult for authorities to investigate. Of the estimated 350,000 people reported missing in Australia each year, I'm happy to say that 95% of them are found.
In accordance with Standing Order 43, I interrupt the member. The time for member statements has concluded, and we move to question time. Are there any questions? I call the Honourable the Leader of the Opposition.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. My question is to the Prime Minister. Given everything that the public now knows, does the Prime Minister still have full confidence in the Assistant Minister for Health?
I call the Honourable the Prime Minister.
Yes.
I call the Honourable Member for Maranoa.
I thank you, Madam Speaker. My question is to the Prime Minister. Will the Prime Minister inform the House what the government is doing to help Australian farmers who are suffering through crippling drought?
I call the Honourable the Prime Minister.
Well, thank you, Madam Speaker, and I thank the member for Maranoa for his question. I thank all members of the House for the concern that they have shown about our fellow Australians, particularly in Western Queensland and Western New South Wales, who are suffering from crippling drought. And I was pleased to be with the Minister for Agriculture about 10 days ago in the member for Maranoa's electorate. I was also in the member for Parkes' electorate and other electorates recently, member for Farrer's electorate, to look at the predicament and to hear firsthand of what people are experiencing. And I should point out to the House that a once-in-20-year drought, let alone a once-in-a-century drought, which is what some people are experiencing, it's much more akin to a natural disaster than it is to an ordinary variation in the business cycle. And I want to assure country Australians, I want to assure all Australians that this government intends to stand by people in need. We intend to stand by people in good times and in bad. So the package of measures which the Minister and myself announced earlier today is, I believe, fair, it's fiscally responsible, and it builds on existing programs. That's why it's able to be implemented reasonably quickly. There are 5 elements to the package which the Minister and I announced. The first is greater access to income support for drought-affected people who have no income and who can't sell, can't leave and can't borrow on the strength of their properties. Greater access to concessional loans for drought-hit farmers, more assistance to state governments dealing with feral animals, more assistance to state governments to deal with water infrastructure projects, and more assistance to community groups who are dealing with people in personal crisis. I think the Australian people get it when it comes to drought. They understand that our cities can't live without a countryside to support them. That's why I'm sure that Australians will welcome the package of measures that the Minister and I announced today. Obviously, what we really need is rain, and I hope and pray for rain. The government, regrettably, cannot work miracles, but we will do what we reasonably can to stand with people in trouble. And my message to country people is we will not let you down.
I call the Honourable the Leader of the Opposition.
On indulgence, on behalf of the Opposition, I welcome the announcement of the drought assistance package. We offer our strong support for helping farmers in the face of this severe drought. We look forward to securing further details and an indication of exactly how many farm families the package is likely to assist. We appreciate and know that our farmers need help, and they need this help now. There are days and issues in this parliament where the opposition will not agree with the government. But on the issue of supporting our farmers in drought, we agree. We offer a bipartisan approach to future drought policy development. Australia's hard-working farmers deserve no less than the strong support of the entire parliament which they have today.
I call the honourable member for Ballarat.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. My question is to the Prime Minister. I refer to the Prime Minister's answer in question time on Monday, where he said Senator Nash's Chief of Staff was required to divest himself of a shareholding in his wife's business. I also refer to the Special Minister of State's statement in Senate estimates last night that Senator Nash's Chief of Staff was not required to divest his interest in a lobbying firm. Who has misled the parliament, the Prime Minister or the Special Minister of State?
I call the honourable the Prime Minister.
Well, the short answer, Madam Speaker, is neither. Madam Speaker, Madam Speaker, Madam Speaker, Madam Speaker, I know that there's likely to be a series of questions today from members opposite on this subject, but I can assure members opposite that on this particular issue there is Labor smoke, but there is no coalition fire. There is smoke without fire. I wish to make two essential points, Madam Speaker.
There'll be silence on my left.
I make two essential points, Madam Speaker. The first is that every action that this good minister has taken is eminently defensible, and within a couple of days, of issues being raised, the staff member in question did the right thing and he resigned.
I call the honourable member for Parkes.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Agriculture. Will the minister outline what new action the government is taking to support farmers and communities both in Parkes and other drought-affected areas across Australia?
I call the honourable Minister for Agriculture.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and I thank the member for Parkes who allowed us into his electorate with the Prime Minister, and there it was part of the hard work that he's done over such a long period of time. Not only him, but also the member for Farrer, Susan Lee, and also the member for Maranoa, Bruce Scott. I also commend the Leader of the Opposition and thank him for his support. I think that issues such as this should rise above politics, and it is a clear example of the Australian people seeing mums and dads who are doing it tough, who are under the pump, and saying that for this issue we'll put politics aside because we must concentrate on these people who are such a clear reflection on who we are. I'd also like to thank the people of the Australian cities in Sydney, in Melbourne and Brisbane, who, when they've done the Vox Pop, say they get it, they understand it quite clearly, that these are people who need to be supported because they live by the vagaries of the weather, they live by the fact that for the last 18 months, sometimes 2 years, they've had no income stream, and they have no prospect of one for the next 6 to 8 months in many instances. And nobody else would want to see themselves in that position where someone would say to you, well, not only have we not paid you in the last 18 months, we don't intend to pay you for at least another half a year. You couldn't survive. The question clearly pointed out what are some of the advantages of this and how we move things forward. And I want to point out a few. We're removing the assets test on what was formerly known as the transitional farm family payment to the new settings. So we go from 1.5 to 2.55, exempting the farm house and also allowing off-farm assets that are comparable to what you would get under other social security packages. We will also make sure that we give the capacity for the person to earn money off-farm up to the value of $80,000, providing that their interest bill is in excess of that. Because what you will often note, and the member for Parkes will be aware of this, is that the money from that just goes straight to the bank. We'll also be making sure that people who have access to a concessional rate of money at 4%, $1 million or 50% of their loan, whichever the lesser, so we keep control of that credit and we are prudent with the finances of our nation. This advantage, if someone has money at, let's say, 8% and they can refinance back down to $40,000 per million over 5 years, that's $200,000. That's a real advantage. We'll also be looking at mental health, and we know the issues of mental health and how important they are, and we will be reinvesting in that. And then other issues such as wild dogs. People might snigger about it, but this is incredibly important. No point feeding out the sheep if the sheep are getting eaten by the wild dogs and other animals. Water infrastructure, also vitally important. So I commend the work that's been done by so many, and I thank the support of the Prime Minister of Australia.
I call the honourable member for Ballarat.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and my question is again to the Prime Minister. I refer to the statement of Minister Nash at Senate estimates this morning. My Chief of Staff has complied with all the requirements to ensure that there was no conflict of interest. I also refer to the Prime Minister's statement in the House on Monday. He was required to divest himself of a shareholding. He was dilatory in doing so. Who has misled the Parliament, the Prime Minister or the Assistant Minister of Health?
Before I call the Prime Minister, there is an assumption in that question that there has been a misleading of the Parliament. That is out of order. You may rephrase your question. There are other forms of the House in which you can make those sorts of allegations. Call the Manager of Opposition Business.
Thank you. Madam Speaker, 2 points. In the first instance, you are ruling out of order a question and a part of the question which is identical to something that was apparently in order only minutes ago. The second issue with that is it has always been practice in this parliament that if there is a belief that someone has misled, that we are allowed to ask a question about it.
Hear, hear.
I have asked the member to rephrase her question, and the question will then stand. Excuse me.
Do you want me to ask the entire question with the rephrase or just the end? I'm happy to ask the whole thing again. My question is to the Prime Minister. I refer to the statement of Minister Nash at Senate estimates this morning. My Chief of Staff has complied with all the requirements to ensure that there was no conflict of interest. I also refer to the Prime Minister's statement in the House on Monday. He was required to divest himself of a shareholding. He was dilatory in doing so. Who is right, the Prime Minister or the Assistant Minister of Health?
I call the Honourable the Prime Minister.
Well, happily, Madam Speaker, both. Happily, Madam Speaker, both. And I want to make it absolutely crystal clear that there has been no breach of the conflict of interest rules.
I call the honourable member for Fairfax.
I've got a question to the Treasurer. The US economy leads the world with its economic strength, growth and exports. I understand that Equatorial Guinea and Uzbekistan have the lowest debt levels in the world. Is the government seeking to follow the US model for growth and jobs, or are we seeking to follow Uzbekistan and Equatorial Giving to achieve their standard of living? When was the last time the US had a surplus? How many surpluses has the US had in the last 50 years? And is the US economy, with its military and economic preeminence, sustainable?
I call the Honourable the Treasurer.
Professor Palmer strikes again.
Well,
the Treasurer has the call.
I'd like to thank Professor Palmer for the question. And, I want to make a confession to him and to Australia. I'm not very familiar with the budget position of Equatorial Guinea or Uzbekistan, but I am more familiar with the United States, and the fact is that the United States economy has been running a substantial deficit for a number of years. The quantitative easing in the United States has suited their times, but of course tapering is now coming into play. And as tapering comes into play and the previous fiscal drag that was in place in the United States is no longer in place in this current year, the United States economy continues to grow, although I must say there was recognition at the G20 over the weekend that there had been some disappointing data that had come out of the United States over the last month or so, which I think many are carefully monitoring. The fact is that we need a strong United States to have a strong global economy. We want the world economy to continue to improve. It is the case also that easy monetary policy, whether it be in Australia or around the rest of the world, is not going to do the long-term heavy lifting when it comes to growing the economy. That has to come through structural change in economies, and Australia is no different. Easy monetary policy will at some time in the future come to an end, and the result of that is that unless we have prepared our economies by having appropriate structural reform, such as getting rid of the carbon tax, such as getting rid of the mining tax, such as having a better balance in workplace relations by bringing back the Australian Building and Construction Commission, such as ensuring that the budget gets back to a sustainable surplus, that as a nation we live within our means. If we don't do it and other countries do not do it, then the problems that have beset the world over the last few years will come back again, and we will consign a future generation around the world to a lesser quality of life than that which we have had. So there's no easy solution here. There are only hard solutions, and the whole nation and the whole world needs to do the heavy lifting.
I call the honourable member for Ballarat. The honourable member, for Barker.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. My question is to the Treasurer. Will the Treasurer outline the medium to long-term impact of the mining tax on the Australian economy?
I call the honourable the Treasurer.
Well, I thank the member for Barker for his question and recognise, as he does, that the mining tax was one of the worst public policy disasters of the last 6 years. It is a big call. It is a very significant call. There was a hell of a lot of competition for bad policy over the last 6 years, but the mining tax was right up there. It was originally forecast to raise $49.5 billion over 10 years, and after 18 months it raised $400 million. The problem was that Labor committed all this new expenditure against a tax that didn't raise any money. So, to put it in perspective, it's like having a $75,000 yearly salary, spending all that money and more, but only getting $6,000 in salary in that year. So where does it leave the budget? Where does it leave the budget? Well, the Labor Party is so supportive of the mining tax that they're happy to see the budget $13 billion worse off. That means $13 billion of extra debt. And the mining tax, as a matter of principle, is actually harmful for the economy because, as was clearly pointed out during its bungled introduction, it was going to have a negative impact on investor sentiment, and it was going to affect the reputation of Australia as a safe place to do business and stable place to do business. Now, I'm glad that the new member for Perth understands this. I'm glad that the new member for Perth, previously a Minister for Planning and Infrastructure in Western Australia, knows that the mining tax is bad for Australia. But I would suggest to the member for Perth that she just lean over to the person on her right and whisper into old Swanee's ear, "What were you thinking, mate? What were you thinking? Go on, give it a shot. Just whisper. You don't have to move your lips. Or write him a little handwritten note. What were you thinking, old Swanee? Introducing a mining tax that raises no money. Spending all that money against that tax. Leaving Western Australia worse off and representing a threat to the sustainability of good finances. But the problem is that this is typical Labor. I mean, we've just seen in South Australia, Jay Weatherill, the Premier of South Australia, has had a leak on him that identified $212 million hole in the budget. That's almost Swanee-esque. Almost Swanee-esque. Jay Weatherill, where did that go to? Another $212 million missing in the Labor budget. That's the problem. Labor doesn't understand money, and they certainly don't understand taxes.
I call the honourable member for Ballarat.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and my question is again to the Prime Minister. Senator Nash told Senate estimates this morning that her Chief of Staff resigned solely because of a media interest that was causing a distraction for the government. On Monday, the Prime Minister told the Parliament that Senator Nash's Chief of Staff resigned because he was dilatory in divesting a shareholding. Who is right, the Prime Minister or the Assistant Minister of Health?
I call the honourable the Prime Minister.
Well, again, Madam Speaker, happily both of us are. Happily both of us are, and I simply say to the member for Ballarat, she will no doubt continue to ask questions on this subject, but really, certainly since the resignation of the gentleman in question, there is just nothing there. There is just nothing there. This is not so much a storm in a teacup. It's not even a zephyr in a thimble. It's nothing, because the conflict of interest rules have been observed.
The member for McMahon. I call the honourable member for Bass.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and my question is to the Minister for Foreign Affairs representing the Minister for Defence. And I remind the Minister of the 56,000 Australian men and women serving our nation in the Australian Defence Force. Will the Minister please advise the House on why it's important that all Australians respect and support the work of our military?
I call the honourable Minister for Foreign Affairs representing the Minister for Defence.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and I thank the member for Bass for his question, and I acknowledge his distinguished service as an officer in the Australian Army and his deployment in Afghanistan and Iraq. Madam Speaker, there is an unwritten rule, indeed a protocol that has been observed for decades in this parliament and across Australian political life, that there be bipartisan support for our military, our troops, whether at home or abroad. That was shattered yesterday
there will be silence on
in
my
Senate
left.
estimates by Senator Stephen Conroy when he launched an attack, when he traduced the reputation of one of Australia's most distinguished military commanders for serving his country. Senator Conroy attacked this commander's motives and his conduct in a most despicable slur designed to dishonour an honourable man. Lieutenant General Angus Campbell has served this country for 30 years, a squadron commander of the SAS. He commanded the 2nd Battalion Group in the UN mission in East Timor. Indeed, he was awarded the Order of Australia for exceptional service. He commanded all Australian troops in the Middle East, and he was awarded the Distinguished Service Cross for his outstanding leadership. He is a man of the highest calibre, an officer who has served his country with distinction, and it was because of his outstanding skills. It was because of his outstanding skills that he was asked by the Australian government to serve his country once more, and he has headed up Operation Sovereign Borders to fix the mess that was left by the last Labor government on our borders. Operation Sovereign Borders was endorsed by the Australian people at the last election. It has been designed to dismantle the criminal people smuggling trade. It is designed to stop people taking that dangerous journey to Australia. It is designed to save lives. It is dangerous work, it is difficult work, and General Campbell has undertaken this task with the professionalism and with the diligence for which he is renowned. Labor can disagree with our policy. They can come up with their own policy. They can attack the government, but they should never engage in the gross disrespect that we saw meted out to General Campbell in Senate estimates yesterday. General Campbell himself said he took extreme offence at the slurs. Now, Senator Conroy should apologise, and the member for Hunter knows that. Senator Conroy should apologise. He should give an unqualified apology. And if he does not, the Leader of the Opposition should remove him from the role of Shadow Minister for Defence. He is unfit for that role.
We will have a little more attention paid to a very serious answer as was given by the Minister for Foreign Affairs. I now give the call to the member for Ballarat.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. My question is again to the Prime Minister. Is the Prime Minister aware that 66 eminent public health professors have written to all state and territory health ministers, including Senator Nash, calling for the Health Star Rating website to be reinstated as a matter of urgency? Why did one junk food lobbyist employed in as the minister's chief of staff determine the government's public health policy rather than the advice of dozens of public...
The member will resume her seat. If the member wishes to rephrase her question, leaving out the argument in the latter part, she may ask her question. I give the call to the member for Ballarat.
Junk food lobbyists.
I give the call to the manager for opposition business.
Thank you. Just to the point of order, I'm trying to work out how describing a business that this individual actually was part of and admits to be and has resigned because can't be referred to in a question.
What is the point of order?
My point of order is there are no grounds for you to make the ruling you just made.
Well, I'm sorry, that's not a point of order.
Well,
I have offered the member for Ballarat the opportunity to leave out the argument of her question and to rephrase it. She's an intelligent woman; she'll work it out. The member for Ballarat.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. So my question is to the Prime Minister. Is the Prime Minister aware that 66 eminent public health professors have written to all state and territory health ministers, including Minister Nash, calling for the Health Star Rating website to be reinstated as a matter of urgency? Why was the Minister of Chief Staff allowed to determine the government's public health policy rather than the advice of dozens of public health experts?
I'll let the question stand despite this final assertion. I give the call to the Prime Minister.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and I thank the member opposite for a question. The premise of the question is simply wrong. It's simply wrong. Now, people are entitled to disagree with the position of the government, but the position of the government was determined by the government, by the minister. It's eminently defensible.
I call the honourable member for Mitchell. The member will resume his seat. The member for Ballarat.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I seek leave to table the letter from the 66 eminent public health experts.
Is leave granted? No. Leave is not granted. I give the call to the member for Mitchell. They'll be quiet on my left. They'll be quiet on my left. The member for Jelly-Brown. I call the member for Mitchell.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. My question is to the Assistant Minister for Defence. I remind the Minister of this statement of the Leader of the Opposition of 23 January this year, and I quote, "What I won't do is join in and start attacking our own military personnel. I, for one, don't want to see our military being used as some sort of political football." Minister, how does that compare with the statements made in Senate estimates by the Shadow Minister for Defence yesterday and the Leader of the Opposition's response today, and why is this matter important with respect to the morale of the men and women of our defence forces?
I call the Assistant Minister for Defence.
Thank you, Speaker. Let me thank the member of Mitchell for his question and acknowledge as a former Army Reserve officer a man with deep interest in the military. It's now a matter of national attention that Senator Conroy has opened his account as Labor's defence spokesman with a grubby and premeditated slur against one of our most respected three-star Lieutenant General officers, accusing him of a political cover-up, no less. 6 months of near total silence from the opposition Shadow Defence Minister, and he decides the best way to come out and support those who support us is to sling mud at a general's face. Well, let me tell you what the military says. It says the standard you walk past is the standard you accept. And what the nation wants to know, and what this parliament wants to know, Leader of the Opposition, is whether you accept the comments, whether you
Madam Speaker, what the nation wants to know is whether the Leader of the Opposition accepts the comments made by the Defence spokesman, and if not, what is the Leader of the Opposition going to do about it? Now, the Leader of the Opposition was asked today, do you personally think Conroy went too far? And the Leader of the Opposition's response, the senator has withdrawn his remarks, and that speaks for himself. And that speaks for himself. Well, I say, Madam Speaker, the Leader of the Opposition, the only thing that speaks for itself is that the Leader of the Opposition's abject failure to bring into line his own shadow Defence Minister is as unacceptable as the original comments themselves. And I say again, Madam Speaker, to the Leader of the Opposition, will he look at the Labor Defence Minister, former the one member for Hunter, Joel Fitzgibbon, when he was asked today, what about your regard for Stephen Conroy? And his response, Stephen Conroy is doing an excellent job as a shadow Defence Minister.
The Minister will resume his seat. I call the Manager of Opposition Business.
Madam Speaker, I quote a page you're familiar with, page 555 of practice. As it is clear from the above examples, it is not in order for ministers to be questioned on opposition policies for which they are not responsible. The Speaker has been critical of the use of phrases at the end of questions, such as "are any threats to," that could be viewed as intended to allow ministers to canvass opposition.
Resume his seat. There's no point of order. I call the assistant. I call. I said there is no point of order. I said you have a second one.
Second point of order.
I hear the Manager of Opposition Business.
In that instance, your ruling must be saying that the minister is responsible for the issues that he's now talking about.
I didn't make a ruling. I said there was no point of order. I call the Assistant Defence Minister. I call the Assistant Minister for Defence.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. If that wasn't enough, Senator Conroy was given another chance to apologise. And you know what? He couldn't manage it. He couldn't man up and manage it. He even went as far to say the people who should apologise, apparently, is the Australian government. Let me say, our serving men and women deserve a lot better than this sort of grubby attack. They deserve an opposition leader who mans up, an opposition leader who actually says, I don't condone this behaviour. If an opposition leader had some courage, he would demand that Senator Conroy publicly apologise for this outrageous remarks. If the Leader of the Opposition takes no action, if he takes no action, he reduces himself to exactly the same level as Senator Conroy. And let's face it, if Senator Conroy was in the army, he'd be peeling potatoes about right now.
I call the Honourable the Leader of the Opposition.
My questions to the Prime Minister. I refer to the Treasurer's statement 2 days before the election. We're not cutting health, we're not cutting education, and we're not cutting defence. I also refer to the decision by the government to cut the pay of some ADF personnel by as much as $19,000. Prime Minister, why are ADF personnel paying the price for another broken promise?
I call the Honourable the Prime Minister.
Well, Madam Speaker, I do appreciate that the Leader of the Opposition is a little embarrassed by the conduct of Senator Conroy. And if the Leader of the Opposition is embarrassed by Senator Conroy's conduct, he should have a word in Senator Conroy's ear and say to him that it would be good for his dignity and that of the parliament if he simply apologised to General Campbell.
The Prime Minister will resume his seat. The Manager of Opposition Business.
There was no argument in the question. It was specific to the pay of people who are serving Australia, and if anything should deserve direct relevance, it is a question of this nature.
The recollection of the question is asked. The member of Kingston is warned. The question, as it was asked, was reflecting on the situation with regard to pay to ADF personnel generally and why the situation was as you have described. Therefore, the Prime Minister's answer is in line with that question. Prime Minister.
Madam Speaker, obviously anticipating this issue, members opposite have decided that this is some kind of a riposte. This is some kind of a riposte for the Leader of the Opposition's unwillingness to pull into line his Shadow Minister for Defence. Now, the trouble with this question is that it is false. Utterly, absolutely and completely false. It's typical, I regret to say, of this opposition. Never let the facts get in the way of a good smear. Typical of this opposition. Now, the truth is, Madam Speaker, that the conditions of service of personnel in the Middle East have changed.
Absolutely right.
Conditions of service have changed. Haven't members opposite realised that we are no longer in combat in Afghanistan? Haven't they recognised that we have concluded our combat mission in Afghanistan? Haven't they realised that? Well, we have. We have concluded our combat mission in Afghanistan.
Kingston will remove herself.
Has the Leader of the Opposition forgot? Has the Leader of the Opposition forgotten that he and I both went to Tarin Kot? We both went to Tarin Kot to solemnly observe that our combat mission had ended. Our combat mission had ended, and therefore, because the conditions of service have changed, the relevant allowances have changed. Now, that decision was made quite properly. That decision was made quite properly by the service chiefs in response to the changed conditions of service in Afghanistan. Now, I can see the member for Hunter, Joel Fitzgibbon, sitting there squirming in embarrassment at this grubby tactic on the part of the opposition. You should be embarrassed by Senator Conroy's behaviour, and you should— I'm sorry, what was that? What was that?
I didn't hear the interjection. Perhaps you could, if it was offensive, I would ask the Leader of the Opposition to withdraw.
Happy to assist. I withdraw.
Prime Minister has the call.
Madam Speaker, the best way to deal with this issue is for the Leader of the Opposition to ask Senator
particularly from the member
to
for
apologise.
Isaacs. If there was not so much noise on my left, I would have been looking at the clock instead of you. I call the honourable member for Lindsay.
My question is to the Minister for Immigration and Border Protection. Will the Minister update the House on how many days it has been since a successful people smuggling venture has arrived in this country?
For Charlton.
What impediments exist to the existing continual successful implementation of the government's strong border protection policies?
I call the honourable Minister for Immigration and Border Protection.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and I thank the member for Lindsay for her question and her keen interest in these issues, as I know it's always been a very keen interest to the electors of Lindsay. It has been, Madam Speaker, 69 days, Madam Speaker, since there has been a successful people smuggling venture to make it to Australia. But despite the success to date of this operation, it still faces obstacles. And those obstacles, Madam Speaker, sit on that side of the chamber, and they sit amongst the Greens, and they sit in the other place as they band together, Madam Speaker. Those obstacles are there. So miffed, Madam Speaker, so miffed are those opposite about the success of the government's border protection policies and how that has exposed their weakness and their incompetence and their failure in government as boat after boat arrived, as person after person arrived, and boat after boat sunk, Madam Speaker. So miffed are they, Madam Speaker, that what they seek to do is adopt the policy of miff, which is try and make it fail. That's what they're trying to do, Madam Speaker. What they're trying to do is make the government's policies fail. Make it fail. The Leader of the Opposition, Madam Speaker, has become the Chief Executive of Wreck the Joint. And not just wreck the joint when it comes to the government's border protection policies, but wreck the joint when it comes to the budget. And as a former UN official, he knows exactly how to do it, Madam Speaker. He knows exactly how to wreck the joint, Madam Speaker. He is the Chief Executive of Wreck the Joint when it comes to policy in this country. Make it fail, Madam Speaker, is the objective of that opposition when it comes to this government policies. But unsatisfied with seeking to frustrate us, Madam Speaker, frustrate our policies, to deny the obvious that our maritime operations are having success and seeking to undermine them, now they've embarked on a new strategy, Madam Speaker, and that is to attack the people who are implementing our policies. Now, he may be a resident of Conrovia or on some other distant planet, as the Minister for Communication advises us from time to time, but it is up to this Leader of the Opposition to call into line the most disgraceful act from Senator Conroy against Lieutenant General Campbell in the Senate last night. He accused him of a political cover-up. And this Leader of the Opposition's failure to force an apology from that senator to Lieutenant General Campbell is an absolute disgrace, Madam Speaker. It is an absolute disgrace. But I will say, Madam Speaker, there is one member opposite who knew what the right thing to do was last night, and that's the member for Chifley. And this is what he said last night. He says, "I'm not going to dance around it. What he said was wrong," for referring to Senator Conroy. "It shouldn't have been said, not to a serving officer in that way." Well, maybe the member for Chifley should be able to step up, because this Leader of the Opposition can't step up when it comes to these matters of border protection.
I call the Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
My questions to the Prime Minister. Today at Senate estimates, Minister Nash explained how she managed her Chief of Staff's conflicts of interest. I required those undertakings. It was my responsibility. I ensured that they were done. Given that Senator Nash failed to ensure her Chief of Staff had ceased his directorship and divested his shareholding, hasn't the minister misled the parliament and failed in her responsibilities as a minister in your government?
That question is going quite close to the window. Allowed to stand. I call the Honourable the Prime Minister.
Well, there's a very simple answer. The answer is no.
I call the Honourable Member for Corangamite.
My question is to the Minister for Education, representing the Minister for Employment and Leader of the House. I remind the Minister that the House passed a motion yesterday apologising for the statement of the former member for Dobell, Mr Craig Thomson, to the House on May 21, 2012. In light of bipartisan support for this motion, what further measures could be taken to better protect members against the misuse of union funds and union power?
I call the Honourable the Minister for Education, representing the Minister for Employment.
Well, thank you, Madam Speaker, and I thank the member for Corangamite for her question. And I do welcome the bipartisan support that the government received yesterday for its motion to apologise for the statement of the former member for Dobell, Mr Craig Thomson, on the 21st of May 2012. Admittedly, it was 2 years too late, but better late than never. And the opposition at least measured up to that test and led the Labor Party into stopping the protection racket that had existed around the former member for Dobell. But it presents the Leader of the Opposition with other tests that he needs to meet if he's going to prove that he is more than a union official representing union officials, that he runs a protection racket for protection rackets. And those tests are mounting up, Madam Speaker, like passing the Australian Building and Construction Commission Bill, passing the Registered Organisations Commission Bill, supporting the Royal Commission into union governance and union corruption. He needs to pay back the $267,000 that Labor used of HSU members' money to elect the former member for Dobell in 2007. And there's a new test that's been set for him today, if he's going to show that he is a real leader and not just a union official representing union officials. And that is whether he will stand up to Senator Conroy in the Senate and make him apologise for the egregious remarks that he made yesterday to Lieutenant General Campbell, attacking him and using him as a political football. And the Leader of the Opposition has said himself, he said himself on the 23rd of January this year, I don't like seeing the Navy—
The member will resume his seat. I call the Manager of Opposition Business.
This takes direct relevance to an entirely new planet. There was nothing in the question that in any way relates to where the minister is now going. The beginning of his answer was directly relevant, no argument at all, but where he is now is completely unrelated.
The member will return to the question.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. And the reason why it is relevant to the question is because Senator Conroy is a well-known union organiser from way back. He cut his teeth as a union organiser, and the question is about union power and the misuse of it.
The minister will resume his seat. The minister will resume his seat. The manager of opposition business on a point of order. He's already had direct relevance.
Now I have that the leader is directly defying your ruling.
There is no point of order. I call the leader of
Madam Speaker, it is directly relevant to the question because the reason why Senator Shorten remains in the position he is today, Senator Conroy, the reason he was brought back from political death, the reason why the Leader of the Opposition won't make him apologise today is because he relies on him to stay in the position of Leader of the Opposition. Senator Conroy has the power. He's calling the tune, just like every other union leader that Mr Shorten, that the Leader of the Opposition responds to about all those policies, whether it's the Australian Building and Construction Commission, the Regional Organisations Commission, the Royal Commission. The Leader of the Opposition is a union official representing union officials. And he went to the AWU conference 2 years ago. He said, I'm union today, union tomorrow, union forever. The point is he needs to rise above his background. He could start by disciplining Senator Conroy and apologising for the way he treated our military personnel.
I call the honourable member for Watson.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. My question is to the Prime Minister. I refer to the Walton Construction Company, which paid a LNP trust $430,000 and recently collapsed, owing its employees millions of dollars in wages and entitlements. Will the Prime Minister direct the Liberal Party to repay this payment to the workers whose entitlements are at risk?
The Prime Minister is not responsible for the LNP. The question is out of order. I call the honourable I call the honourable member for Page.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. And my question is to the Minister for Communications. Will the Minister explain the importance of government agencies, including the NBN, giving the government and the public frank, credible and factual correct information? And what are the consequences, Minister, of ignoring or indeed denying such information?
I call the honourable Minister for Communications.
So I thank the honourable member for his question. And, Madam Speaker, yesterday was a big day in the Senate for denying and ignoring information and truth and facts about the National Broadband Network. We had in the morning in room 2S3 Ziggy Switkowski, the chairman of the NBN, one of Australia's leading businessmen, laying out the facts about the NBN rollout. And what did the Shadow Defence Minister have to say? Senator Conroy appearing there in his shadow role as broadband spokesman. After hours of abuse, he then proceeded to accuse Ziggy Switkowski of lying and misleading the Senate and refused to retract. One of our most respected businessmen. But then, after being compared in this chamber with the Lieutenant Onoda who fought on in the jungle for 28 years, Senator Conroy then careened into the main committee room, madder than ever, and then proceeded to accuse Lieutenant General Campbell of being none other than Colonel Jessup. And he actually said, Madam Speaker, he said, "We are living in a movie and you are Colonel Jessup." Well, of course, that means that he obviously thought he was the incredibly handsome Daniel Caffey, played by Tom Cruise. Well, we can all see the resemblance. It's obvious. He'd be excused for thinking that. Madam Speaker, when it comes to denial of the facts, I think the better movie analogue is in fact Colonel Kurtz, leading the Labor Party further and further up the Conrovian River into delusion and denial. And you know, we remember the last scenes of that movie as his temple fortress, his jungle fortress, is being smashed by bombs, fire everywhere, columns falling, walls collapsing. And what does he say? What does Colonel Kurtz say? as he is dragged from the ruins, he says, "I had immense plans. I had immense plans. I was on the verge of greatness." Madam Speaker, the real summary of Colonel Conroy's performance are, of course, the most famous lines in that movie, "The horror, the horror."
That is disorderly. We'll have none of that. I call the Leader of the Opposition.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. My question is to the Prime Minister. Given everything that's been put to the Prime Minister today and the testimony at estimates this morning, how on earth can the Prime Minister or anyone have any confidence in the Assistant Minister for Health?
Yeah.
I call the Honourable the Prime Minister.
Madam Speaker, the Minister has not breached the conflict of interest rules. In order to avoid any perception of potential conflict of interest, the staffer in question resigned. The Minister is doing a fine job. Every single decision that has been made by her in that portfolio is eminently defensible, and I back it to the hilt.
I call the honourable member for Gilmore.
Madam Speaker, my question is to the Treasurer. Will the Treasurer outline the medium to long-term impact of the carbon tax on the Australian economy?
I call the Honourable the Treasurer.
I thank the honourable member for her question, and I advise the House that whilst the Leader of the Opposition has a horse running wild in the top paddock, he's got a Senate that is not prepared to pass one of the bills that will actually improve economic growth in Australia and create jobs, and that's the bill that repeals the carbon tax. The fact of the matter is the modelling commission, not by this government, modelling commissioned by the previous Labor government, identifies that the carbon tax would actually detract from economic growth. It would actually cost jobs. It would actually cost the economy. Now, Labor are sticking like glue to the carbon tax. They own the carbon tax. It is their creation, and they are prepared to die defending the carbon tax. The carbon tax, here, they say, here. They're all there defending the carbon tax, which costs jobs, which means less economic growth, and at the end of the day is going to cost the Australian economy. The cumulative loss of output would be $22 billion by 2020 as a result of the carbon tax. What's more, this will rise to $175 billion as a cost to the Australian economy by 2030. That's in 2012 dollars. $175 billion to the Australian economy having the carbon tax. And yet Labor is determined to fight to the death to keep this tax. And you can be sure that if Labor's ever elected, they'll reintroduce the carbon tax. Because if they're so absolutely committed to the carbon tax here in opposition after losing an election, they would not be afraid to reintroduce it again. They would not be afraid to go back and reintroduce it, and they might not promise it at the election, because we know they've got form in that regard. They never tell you about a carbon tax before the election, but sure as you can be sure as the sun rises up in the morning, they'll introduce it after the election, because the carbon tax is in the Labor Party's DNA, even though it costs jobs. As New South Wales Treasury said, it's going to cost 31,000 jobs in New South Wales by 2030, and yet Labor is defending this to the death. The impact on wages, the impact on industry, the impact on the health and education sector, which is not compensated for the carbon tax, it flows right through the economy, and it flows through to every single area of production, every single area of activity. Yet Labor is defending it to the end. The problem is the Labor Party doesn't know what it stands for, other than the fact it's prepared to hit the average Australian worker.
Before I call the member for Corio, I just wish to announce that we have with us today in the gallery the Honourable Mark Vaile, AO, former Deputy Prime Minister of Australia, and also Mr Mike Simon, the former member for Deakin. We make you most welcome. I call the Honourable Member for Corio.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. My question is to the Prime Minister. Can the Prime Minister confirm his office was told before 1 p.m. on Saturday that the information provided to the Minister for Immigration and Border Protection in Tuesday's press conference about the location of Reza Barati's death was inaccurate?
I call the Prime Minister.
Well, I can confirm that my office would have been listening to the Minister for Immigration and Border Protection on Tuesday afternoon when he said that it was now unclear exactly where many of the things that took place on that fateful evening had in fact taken place. Now, I'll gladly check the record, and if there's anything to tell the Parliament, I'll come back and tell the Parliament. But again, Madam Speaker, exactly what is the evil here? Exactly what is the grievous error? Exactly what is the monument of maladministration that members opposite are trying to uncover? As soon as the minister was aware of a problem on the Monday night, he went public on the Tuesday morning. By the time he got to Canberra on the Tuesday afternoon, he was aware that there was some possibility that more information might come to light. He went public with that, and on the Saturday, he conclusively discovered. Look, maybe it was midday, maybe it was 1 o'clock, maybe it was 2 o'clock. As soon as he was clear, what does it really matter? What does it really matter? What does it really matter if he delayed 15 minutes or half an hour or an hour? What does it really matter? What does it really matter?
Those on my left will be quiet.
The truth is, Madam Speaker, as soon as he reasonably could, after clarifying the position, he was completely upfront with the Australian public and the Australian people. Now, Madam Speaker, this minister has a very difficult job. Restoring border security after the legacy that this government inherited, a massively difficult job, and I want to say that I deeply admire and respect the strength and the integrity that he has brought to this job. And while, Madam Speaker, I can understand that members opposite would be a little embarrassed at the way the boats are stopping now, surely they at least ought to be men and women enough to give credit where it's due. This minister is stopping the boats. That's what counts.
I call the honourable member for Denison. Is the agreement?
Madam Speaker.
No, I'm sorry. The member for Denison does not have the call. It's the member for Hume.
You're trying it on.
Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Because he had it yesterday.
My question is to the Minister for the Environment. I refer to the information released by the Clean Energy Regulator last week that shows that the cost of the carbon tax is a $1.1 billion impost on Australian manufacturers. Can the minister inform the House how many businesses are paying the carbon tax?
I call the Honourable Minister for the Environment.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker, and I want to acknowledge the member for Hume and a very distinguished business career in which throughout the time he learned a lot about how to manage businesses and was always concerned about bad bills of all kind, whether they are bad electricity bills, bad carbon tax bills, bad fuel bills or just plain bad bills. Now, he asks about how many businesses are being affected by these bad bills. Well, the answer is not as they would have us believe on the other side, 500 firms that were hit by the carbon tax, not 5,000 that have been hit by the carbon tax, not even 50,000 that have been hit by the carbon tax, but according to the Australian Treasury, directly 75,000 firms have been directly hit by carbon tax bills. But more than that, every firm in Australia that consumes electricity or gas is also hit by the carbon tax, and every family in Australia that consumes electricity or gas is also hit by the carbon tax. And the question specifically went to manufacturing. And as the Clean Energy Regulator set out recently, it's not just a multi-billion-dollar hit on Australian firms, but specifically on manufacturing, it's a $1.1 billion hit. And that $1.1 billion includes $596 million in the metals sector, whether it's firms such as Rio Tinto or Nearstar, whether it's in the chemical manufacturing sector, where there's a $311 million hit for firms such as Incitec Pivot, which provide fertilisers to farmers. In the glass and cement manufacturing sector, it's a $30 million hit. CSR, Adelaide Brighton, at a time of massive global pressure, we are putting massive Australian pressure on our manufacturing firms. Pulp and paper, another $25 million. Food and product manufacturing, another $25 million. A $1.1 billion manufacturing hit. So the question then is, with these bills being foisted upon Australian firms, what can we do about it? Well, come next Monday, when the Senate sits again, it will have been 3 months that the carbon tax bills have been before the Senate. 3 months, and the Senate, according to this opposition leader, is on an industrial go-slow. So the opposition leader, who has a history of enforcing industrial go-slows, has his senators on a go-slow. 3 months, they're not even close to repealing the carbon tax. They're not even close to voting on the on repeal of the bills. And the message is, if you want to do something for Australian manufacturing firms, get out of the way and repeal the bills.
I call the honourable member for Denison.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, I seek leave to move the following motion: that the Opposition Defence spokesperson be admonished for calling into question the integrity of Lieutenant General Angus Campbell.
Is the motion accepted?
Leave is granted.
And leave is granted. I call the honourable member for Denison.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, I think everyone in this place would be well aware that I haven't been slow to criticise this government and previous governments when it's come to the decisions they've made about the use of the Defence Force. I, of course, was especially outspoken about the decision during the Howard government to join in the invasion of Iraq for what I thought were fraudulent reasons. I was very critical of the decision more recently to keep our troops in Afghanistan much longer than they should have been there. And my outspoken criticism of the current government's abhorrent response to asylum seekers, I think, is well known. When it comes to asylum seekers, I think we should be acting like a rich and civilised country and as a signatory to the Refugee Convention. We should be taking people in, giving them protection, hearing their claim and giving them refuge if their claims are found to be accurate. And those whose claims are found not to be accurate, sent back from where they came. But in all of these instances, I've been very careful not to criticise the men and women of our security services, and in particular of the Defence Force and of the intelligence services. And I think a line was crossed yesterday when the opposition defence spokesperson called into question the integrity of General Campbell. General Campbell is a classmate of mine and someone I know a little, and I know that he is a good person, and I know that he will do a good job following the orders he is given by the government of the day, as unpalatable as those orders are. And I want to make this absolutely clear, Madam Speaker. I am in no way speaking in support of the government's abhorrent response to asylum seekers. I am criticising, though, the Shadow Defence spokesperson who went too far yesterday by calling into question, I should say, the character of one of Australia's most senior military officers. He's been given shocking orders to carry out, but I'm sure that he's carrying them out to the best of his ability, and he's doing it as honestly as he can. So I call on everyone in this place to support this motion, that the Opposition Defence spokesperson be admonished for calling into question the integrity of Lieutenant General Angus Campbell.
I call the Honourable Minister for Foreign Affairs.
Madam Speaker, I seek to second this motion.
Does the member wish to speak now?
I do. Madam Speaker, I support the motion being put forward by the member for Denison because what occurred yesterday in the Senate estimates hearing was a reflection not only on the Senate but a reflection on this entire parliament, that a person who occupies the position as Shadow Minister for Defence could use the opportunity to launch a personal attack against one of Australia's finest military commanders is nothing short of a disgrace. And what we wanted to hear from last night and this morning and throughout question time was something from the Leader of the Opposition to show that he did not agree with the outrageous, appalling, despicable conduct of the man he appointed as Shadow Minister of Defence. What we wanted from the Leader of the Opposition was for him to say that Labor distanced themselves from this disgraceful act of attacking a military commander who had been asked by the Australian government to return to the service of this country by heading up Operation